Caroline here. I promised a video about the schools bill. I would make yourself a cup of tea and settle down if I were you. I'm going to share my screen because I've got some slides to speak to. Slideshow. Play from the beginning. Okay, so this is your lowdown on the schools bill 2022, what it means for home educating families and what you can do about it. You will have probably heard about the schools bill. You might have heard of people on social media, seen lots of posts on social media about it, a lot of concerns being expressed, some people getting very, very worried, other people a bit baffled by what's happening. Is it really happening? What impact it's going to have? So I'm hoping that I can answer some of the questions that you may have been having. I'm sure there'll be lots of other questions, or you might just end up more confused. Hopefully not. So the government has been threatening to make registration for home educators compulsory for a while now. At the moment, it's not compulsory. You don't have to notify the government if you are home educating, although they will find out if you've deregistered. A school will notify the local authority, but at the moment you are not required to register. So that they've been threatening to change that. There is now a bill before Parliament that will do just this. Before there have been consultations, there's been debate, not that that's really included us. So it's all been sort of in the air. They put out a white paper saying they were thinking of doing this, but now there is an actual bill, which is a proposed law. It is before Parliament. The House of Lords have started to debate it. It has to go through various stages. Amendments will be tabled and discussed. That's like proposed changes, which the government can ignore, or it can accept, or it can come back with its minor adjustments. But this is happening, and the government want to get this on the statute book within the year. So it's being debated now. There will be an impact on home educated children and also children who are not fine in school, and not a good impact. This isn't something that anyone who is involved in home education can or should ignore. The only reason we haven't actually got something worse in front of us, like powers to sort of raid people's homes and whatnot and monitor it constantly, is because home educators always resist and always fight back. There is a lot of uncertainty about the precise nature of what's coming, how it's going to work, and the exact impact it's going to have, because the proposals could be amended. The bill in parts doesn't really quite make sense. And there's going to be a lot more work done after the legislation is passed. There'll be guidance written and regulations and whatnot. And it will also depend on how it is actually implemented on the ground. So there's a lot of uncertainty around it. But people who are worried, they are definitely right to be concerned, but there's literally no point in panicking. Won't do any good. So what's the rationale for this? The main proposals that affect home educators are in part 3 of the bill, which is entitled School Attendance. Yeah, that's a bit odd. And you may have heard Nadhim Zahawi, who's the current Secretary of State for Education, saying there's no doubt in my mind that being in school is vital for a child's learning and development. He keeps parroting this. And then they keep saying, oh, but most home educators do an excellent job, of course, but really school is the best place for a child. The bill comes about because government has been lobbied over, well, a long time, a decade or more, by certain interests in local government who claim to have concerns. And those concerns are, the number of children being home educated has gone up like that. Yes, it went up quite a bit during COVID because there were a lot of families who were shielding, and they thought, well, we'll take our children out because we don't feel they're safe and they could infect our loved one who is very vulnerable. And a lot of those children have actually gone back in the system. And it has been going up steadily over the years, partly because of problems in the school system, partly because more people are aware of it now. But it's not a sort of, suddenly the numbers have shot up. The numbers have actually stabilized recently. Anyway, that's their concern. A lot of people in local government say, Some families are removing their children from school for reasons other than in the best educational interests of the child. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Some people feel they've got no option but to remove their child from school and do it to themselves because of, things like bullying, unmet special educational needs, all sorts of issues with the education system. But let's just put those to one side. It's also claimed there are too many home educated children who are invisible to the authorities. They're hidden, invisible, and potentially they're at risk as a result. This claim is, again, highly dodgy because children are not hidden. I mean, they're in the library, they're in the park, they're in the museum, they're in the art gallery, they go to the doctors, they go to the dentist, they go to the museum, they take part in their communities, they go to guides, they go to rainbows. So the idea that they're invisible is a bit of a joke. And the idea that they're potentially at risk is a bit of a joke because all the evidence shows that your child is actually at less risk of abuse and bullying and what have you if they are out of school. It's also claimed they think there are too many home educated children who are really not getting an education, or they're not getting a suitable education. No evidence whatsoever. All of the research evidence is that home educated children do really well, have really good outcomes, benefit from their home education. So yeah, well, that's the rationale anyway. So you can see what we're up against. This isn't a bill about, asking us as a home education community what we actually think needs to change or how we would like things improved. And I think if it was up to us, we'd say sort out the education system. So the bill would introduce compulsory local authority registers for children not in school, including home educated children. Bizarrely, if you're flexi schooling, I think parents would like this to be far more widespread, but it's not a huge thing. But there may be some people who have a flexi schooling arrangement, so their child is maybe in school part-time and home educated part-time, and they will have to be on this register as well. There are also some children who are simply too ill to attend school, but they're on the roll and the school knows where they are, but they're just not getting any education. Anyway, so compulsory local authority register. So if you're the parent of a home educated child, under this bill, under this law, you would be required by law to register with the local authority. We think this applies even if you are already known to them, so they may already have you on a list somewhere. It doesn't matter. Everyone will be under the same duty to register, and you'll have to do this within 15 days and provide them with all sorts of information about your child or children and family as may be prescribed by the government or that the local authority decides that it would like. I'll come back onto what information in a bit. You'd also have to update the local authority with any changes to this information. Now, you will face further action if you do register, but you don't supply the local authority with all the information they want, or you give inaccurate information, or you don't get your information in on time. You will also face further action if you don't register and don't comply with this duty, but they then find out about you and that you are home or maybe home educating. So what does this further action look like? Well, you will be issued with a preliminary notice for a school attendance order. So they'll immediately start looking at, right, can we get these kids back into school? And you will need to supply them with evidence to convince them that you are, in fact, providing a suitable education within 10 days, or they will issue a school attendance order requiring you to register your child at a particular school. School attendance orders already exist in law. There is already a system which only applies if they have evidence that you're not providing a suitable education. Only then can they look at the school attendance order provision. But this bill is changing things because it's if you don't jump through their hoops in the right order at the right time, then you could find yourself in trouble. So it's kind of tightening the screws, as it were. So breaching a school attendance order is potentially a criminal offence, and the LA can opt to prosecute you. You do have the option of attending court, entering a not guilty plea, and then later at the hearing, providing evidence to the court that your child is in fact receiving a really good home education outside school. if you lose, of course, there are fines, and there's now also the possibility of going to prison. And school attendance orders are very hard to get lifted or revoked. And there's a very weird bit in the bill which seems to suggest that if your child has an EHCP that specifies the name of a school or another institution, you can't actually ask the local authority to revoke the school attendance order. So no one really knows if that's a mistake or they actually mean it. The bill, in part, is drafted very, very poorly. And people who are discussing this with civil servants are kind of raising a lot of issues. Did you really mean to draft it like that? What is that actually saying? Anyway, this does sound a little bit scary, and it's very, very complicated. And there is a long sort of Q&A facts on EdYourself website all about this, the school attendance order thing, and how it's going to be, how it would be different under this bill, which if you're worried about that, I would recommend you read it, because it's really good. It sets out what we, what people think would be the scenario based on what the bill says now. Anyway, this is tightening the ratchet. So what if I don't want to go on this register? How can they make me? Well, if you're already known to the local authority, you will still need to register and supply information on to their time scale. So please don't think this bill will not affect you. It will affect anybody who's home educating. If you are not already known, then you have the choice. You can just sit tight and just decide not to do anything, or you can be a good parent and notify the local authority, say I'm eligible for this register, fill in their form or whatever it is, and provide them with the information they require. So you could sit tight though, just don't be proactive, don't notify them, and just wait and see, do they stumble across you? But if you go down the route of sitting tight, you need to be ready and prepared to be able to supply evidence of suitable education within 10 days of them catching up with you. 10 days means 10 working days. So basically it's like 2 weeks effectively. So it's, you can ignore them. There's nothing, they don't have magical powers to kind of identify all the home educators. They will obviously be asking around and making inquiries and whatever, but it may be that they don't pick up on everybody. So what information is going to be required for this register? Well, we know that it has to include basic things like the child's name, date of birth, home address of the child, and then parents, plural, names and home addresses. They will also want certain details of how your child's education is being provided. We don't know what exactly that means in practice, because that's going to come in regulations. They're going to clarify that in regulations, but you'll have to provide details of any places that your child goes to receive any of the education. And the information could be really anything else the government orders, puts in regulations, or that the local authority decides it wants. A government briefing suggests that they might ask your child's ethnicity, other demographic information. They may insist on knowing your reasons for home educating. They may want information about special educational needs, or information about your child's welfare and general circumstances. And there are some very naughty LAs out there who ask about, what's your family income and stuff like that. That's completely irrelevant. But the information thing, we literally don't know. It could be very wide in its scope. Also, anybody who the local authority thinks may be providing some educational learning opportunity for your child, and that's without you present. So it's anything that's drop off without other parents there. If they do that for more than a certain amount of time, I don't know how many hours a week they're thinking of, we have no idea, it's unspecified at the moment, will be required to provide the local authority with information about your child on request within 15 days, or they will be fined up to £2,500. And they can also be fined if they supply inaccurate information. So this could potentially apply to childminders. If you're working part-time and your child was with a childminder, they could be forced to provide information or get fined. Tutors under certain circumstances, depending on how long they're with your child. Drop-off classes or activities, probably ones that are sort of more, a number of hours a week. Maybe granny, if your child's at granny's, maybe granny would have to confirm that she's helping out with the home education. We don't know yet, because a lot of this depends on stuff that's coming later. So the local authority would hold this register and they would hold all this information, but they would be required to share data relating to your child and others on the register with the Secretary of State when they ask for it. And we don't know the extent of that. It does sound a bit scary. The local authority can also share information about your child from the register with whatever agencies they feel like, if they think it's appropriate. Now, normally, you shouldn't share people's information without their consent unless there's a risk of significant harm. But this bill says they can share information if they think it will promote the child's welfare. So there's a lot of concern about that because it goes a bit too far. And already they do share information, which they're not supposed to do. But the point of this bill is it kind of legitimizes bad practice, which isn't good. And if you move to another council area, the local authority can share all the info it holds about you and your child with a new authority. Again, that happens already, but this is just kind of legitimizing it. There is also, and this, don't get overexcited about this, there is a duty on the local authority to provide home educating parents with support on request. So that could be information, advice, assistance, services to support your child's education. So that, on the face of it, that's like, oh, well, that's not too bad, is it? But there's no duty to provide specific forms of support, like help with GCSE tuition or help with exam costs. And a local authority need only provide the support that it decides it wants to give you, rather than the support you're actually needing and the support that you're actually asking for. So local authorities sometimes say, well, by way of support, we'll give you a home visit, so they can send around an administrator, an officer who has no experience of home education, to give you their input and feedback on your on how you're educating your child, and make judgments about you. And that might be branded, as it is now, it's often branded support. This is part of our support offer. And crucially, there's no additional funding as yet proposed to support this new duty. They say, oh, well, we can talk about that later. We'll maybe look at that later. So is it a actually meaningful duty to provide support? Nobody's really fooled. No, it isn't. There are other provisions in the bill that will sort of indirectly impact. So there is a crackdown on school attendance, because a day or an hour missed of school is an absolute disaster, according to the government. You know, you'll be poor, your child's future will be wrecked. So they're cracking down on school attendance, and that's because there are no measures really to improve the lot of children with mental health problems and improve their access to support. There's nothing in the bill that would help children with special educational needs either. We know there's a lot of children there are not fine in school because schools are not inclusive and are not set up to meet their needs. And so attendance can be low, attendance can be affected because your needs are not being met. So if they make the attendance regime even more sort of harsher than it is now, and keep threatening people with fines and prosecution and whatnot, some parents are going to just think, do you know what, I can't deal with this anymore, and they will deregister their children, and then they will then be subject to all of the rather unpleasant stuff around home education as well. So not good. And then also the government is cracking down on illegal schools, as they call them. So they are going to tighten the definition of the types of educational institutions that have to register with the government and Ofsted. So there'll be more, they're trying to capture more types of providers, and they're also going to increase Ofsted's already huge and slightly terrifying powers to inspect and sort of, you know, raid premises and access computers and stuff. So they're going to increase Ofsted's powers, and this could impact on some services used by home educators. It depends how they define what is a full-time education. In some areas of the country, there's some really good alternative providers that a lot of home educators use who have had problems in the past. They're not school, they're not attempting to be anything like a school, because they offer self-managed learning in small groups, and they're really, they're really, really beneficial. And they're already in some places having a lot of JIP with Ofsted. So this isn't sounding too great. So what are the problems with this bill? I've sort of hinted at a lot of them. The first problem is, if you're going to legislate, you better make sure that it's on the basis of sound evidence. And this bill is not on the basis of sound evidence. It's claimed that home education is a problem that needs sorting out. It isn't. It's not the problem. Children achieve good outcomes and they're actually safer out of school. It's not the whole compulsory register thing is not needed. Local authorities already have lists. Already 96% of home educators are known to the local authority. The people they don't know about are people who have always home educated, whose children have never been at nursery or school. And the government it always says, oh, well, we've got less concerns about them because they made a positive choice from the beginning and they'll know what they're doing. So those are the only people they're kind of missing. They may be missing odd people who travel around quite a bit. But really, it's not, you wouldn't pass legislation on the basis of this 4% of this group who are not even at risk that you're missing. Doesn't make any sense. The bill is very badly drafted. So there's too much that is left till later on that's not on the face of the bill, that will be decided later on by the Secretary of State with no proper scrutiny. It also will not achieve the government's aims. There's all this stuff about, oh, we want every child to have a world-class education and every child to be safe and da 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 da. Actually, the bill could, on the contrary, it could restrict educational options. If you have tutors and alternative providers looking at the new regime thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to have to supply information about all these home educated kids to the government. We may even have to, start registering with Ofsted. They might trying to impose their sort of schooly ways on us. They might just think, you know what, let's just not bother. So that's a possibility. It could also really result in some of the most disadvantaged children being forced back into the school system, into unsuitable schools, because there's so much in this new regime where you could just get tripped up. It's like a series of tripwires and hoops. And if you don't jump through the right hoop in the right way at the right time, you could find yourself, facing this very intimidating sort of punitive regime where you have to prove and give evidence of this. Otherwise, and if they don't accept it, then they can take you to court and try and impose, basically shove your child back into school. The data gathering and all of those provisions are causing a lot of concern around the way in which they could compromise the safety of a lot of vulnerable parents and children. So domestic violence groups are really, really worried that violent partners, because all of this information and you've got the parents' home addresses and everything is in one place, that if that data leaks, then people could be at real risk if a violent partner finds out where somebody lives. And this already happens, that in some places local authorities have accidentally passed on the address of one partner to another, and then that partner was estranged and didn't want any contact with the violent one, and then there's been awful things happen as a result. And data, local authorities, neither local authorities nor the Department for Education are actually any good at keeping data safe. They're actually really, really bad at it. The Department for Education's data management provisions were audited and found to be absolutely appalling. Local authorities are always randomly sending information to places that they shouldn't. So, for example, in our email inbox, there's an email from Nottinghamshire County Council, basically passing on details. Well, it's in a file. I didn't open it, obviously, because it's private, about a home educated family that was moving to Somerset. And I think they were thinking they were emailing Somerset County Council, but it came to us. And you think, how on earth can that happen? But this happens all the time. So they need to really sort out their data management, because it's absolutely atrocious. And this is private information. It's a lot of potentially very, personal information about people that really needs to be better protected. this is a slippery slope because the local government association are very clear. They want the register because they think it's going to be then easier. They don't want to go in too hard at the beginning. They want to get the register sorted, and then they're coming for more. They want the power to monitor, duty to monitor home educating families, and they want the right to enter people's homes, which is not a good idea. These provisions have no support among the home education community. We've always said we are against compulsory registration, and we've set out really good arguments as to why it won't work. For example, there will be people who just simply won't register. You can make it a legal requirement and people simply will not comply. It's just not going to work. And we've set out the arguments really clearly. Nobody's listened. Also, these provisions are not compatible with human rights, because if you're going to interfere with somebody's liberty, and home education is a very personal thing, it's to do with the relationship between a parent and their child. It happens in the private sphere quite often, as well, libraries and whatnot. But the government accepts that they are actually intruding and interfering with people's human rights, just as that they don't seem to care. You can only infringe on people's human rights if you have a really, really good reason, and it has to be proportionate what you're doing. And this really isn't. It's taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. There are a lot of concerns around the data protection provisions, as I've said, because they're not based on consent, and there is a risk of misuse of data and leaks, which would compromise people's privacy and potentially their well-being. What this bill will do is give bad local authorities a blank check to harass and penalise people even more. So we have a postcode lottery at the moment. How you get treated really depends on where you live. So you don't want to move to Portsmouth, let me put it that way, because they really have it in for home educators there. And they impose all sorts of demands that are not even legal, and they get away with it. There are no checks and balances. It gives local authorities an awful lot of power over people's lives, and there's no appeal. If you feel you've been badly treated by local authority officers, if you feel they've harassed you, they're not following existing law, they're not following the guidance, in theory you can complain to the local government ombudsman, but that's several months hence, and there really isn't enough safeguards in the system. There's no redress if your rights are abused. These provisions are likely to cause a lot of unwarranted stress. So you've got the stress of having to jump through all these hoops, having to register, having to share all this information, which you're not sure if it's going to be kept safe. Are they going to be happy with what you're doing? Are they going to ask for information that sort of suggests that you should be doing, marked work, which guidance says you don't have to do at the moment? And for some families, it could cause harm. So there will be some people who get caught up in these provisions whose children maybe were really, really traumatized by school. And if the parent just accidentally makes some mistakes when they're filling in the register or whatever, and gets some things wrong, provides the wrong information, or they're not skilled enough at providing information in a form that will please the local authority, they could face, the whole school attendance process. And navigating that, you have to, have your wits about you. You need access to support and whatnot. And if people don't have that, then they could face, a lot of children could end up back in school where it's really, really unsuitable. And a lot of traumatized kids could be further traumatized and come to real harm. And this bill does nothing to address the real issues of the education system. And the real problems that a bill should be addressing is the fact that bullying is rife in school system, the crisis in special educational needs, and teachers fleeing the profession because they can't cope with the stress and the workload, and the whole teaching to the test culture, which is also damaging children's mental health. Children in the UK have among the worst levels of mental ill health in the whole world. And that's because of the school system. A lot of that is to do with the pressures of the school system and having to fit into boxes and having to jump through hoops. But the bill isn't interested in that. Are there any benefits at all from this bill? No, I mean, you could argue that if the support duty was a real support duty, that might be, you know, some consolation. But frankly, even then, I don't think such a law as currently drafted would be acceptable. I think it would still do more harm than good. Because frankly, we are up against a system that still doesn't really accept home education as a real benefit to society. In law, it is of equal status to school, but you still have people peddling a lot of misinformation about home education. There is a lack of understanding that actually learning outside of school is very, very different, but there are huge benefits in terms of children being able to learn at their own pace, the huge levels of parental involvement, and children being able to follow their interests, and so on and so forth. So, not good, the schools bill. What can you do? A lot is being done behind the scenes by groups like Education Otherwise and the Centre for Personalised Education. There are a lot of really good individuals who've been around for donkey's years, who understand the law and have links with, have contacts with the Department for Education. They're passionate about home education. They are lobbying on our behalf and trying to get things changed. We're briefing against the bill as well, talking to parliamentarians, and we're always pushing the interests of home educators. We need still to increase the positive promotion of home education and build understanding that it's not school at home, and that there are huge benefits to children of learning outside school, and that school is not right for every child. What you can do, what I would definitely advise you to do, is if you're on Facebook, look up the Home Education Action Group. That is where action against the bill is being coordinated. That's where you can find loads of really good information, where you can ask lots of questions. It's a really, really good group. That's probably the main group I would join if you want to resist this, or just even get informed about it. And information really is power. So do read up on the bill, read up on the existing system and how the bill would change it. Arm yourself with some good arguments about why this bill is such a really bad thing. Don't be afraid to ask questions, ask for more explanation, empower yourself. It's also important that we all make our voices heard. So it's a good idea, given that the bill is currently in the Lords and it hasn't reached the Commons, the House of Commons, where your elected members of Parliament are, there's a window where we can try and get a dialogue going with MPs to explain concerns and seek support from them, and sharing your personal story. So you could, whether that's, well, I've never had little Johnny and Bessie in school, and because we always wanted to have more time together as a family, and they have, they're very precocious in lots of ways, and we just thought this would be so much better for them to explore their interests, and these are the ways they're benefiting. Or you could describe how your child was, really badly off in school, and how much happier and more fulfilled and how much better they're doing out of school. Personal stories are really important, because logic only takes you so far. It's more about feeling. It's more about really making them care about this issue and care about children being able to be themselves and to learn in the way that best suits them. So do get in touch with the MP. The MP for Taunton Deane is Rebecca Powell, who's not particularly responsive, but it really depends where you live. So there's quite a few different parliamentary constituencies around and about. So if you're not sure, if you don't live in like the centre of Taunton, you're not sure, you can go on the Write to Them website, and if you put in your postcode, it will, and then click search, it will then bring up all your elected representatives, including your MP, and then you should be able to email your MP from there. You could also try looking up their phone number on the Parliament UK website and ask to speak to them. I'm not sure if our MP does surgery. Surgeries are where MPs arrange to have an afternoon or something at a community centre somewhere out in the community, and any of their constituents can go in and talk to them, or you could make an appointment to go and speak to them. So that is quite a challenge in a way, but it can really pay dividends, and we've just got to try. Maybe we could ask Rebecca Powell to come and meet a group. Maybe there's strength in numbers, and we could talk to her. I don't know. Anyway, there are campaign actions ongoing, so there's a lot of activity on social media. If you're on Twitter, I can let you know the sort of Twitter, the handles that you want to link up with. There's Fair Hearing for Home Ed. There's quite a lot of organized campaigning on Twitter at the moment. There are various things, images and whatnot you can share on social media, posts that you can share. There are some really interesting people on social media who are advocating for us, they may be home educators, but they're also like clinical psychologists. There's some really interesting people who've got quite a high profile who are starting to champion home education, which is really good. There was a demo outside, a sort of rally outside the Houses of Parliament a few weeks ago. There may be more. If you're on the Home Education Action Group, that's where you will find out about that. And there is going to be an organised mass petition thing. So in each parliamentary constituency, there's going to be a petition where we're saying we are opposed to this bill, this is why, and then we need to gather signatories. So you have to physically sign it, give your name, postcode, and sign it. And then those are all going to wing their way to the Houses of Parliament. And so home educators and families and supporters, children can sign. As long as they can sign their own name, they can also sign. So there's a big petition from as many constituencies around the country as possible, and they will all get presented at the same time. And that could make a big impact, because this has been done before when there were previous threats to home educators' rights, and it did make a big impact because it demonstrated actually we're a force to be reckoned with, that parents and families, the length and breadth of this country, are not simply going to sit back and take this nonsense. So there's lots of things happening. What if the worst comes to the worst and the bill gets to the statute book? Should we all panic, leave the country? No. The ideal outcome, of course, is that we manage to get the government to drop the clauses on children not in school, or that they get so heavily amended that we can remove the coercion and protect people's rights. So, you know, say that registration should continue to be voluntary, get some better safeguards against local authority bad practice, because there's so much of that out there. But if not, once the bill becomes law, they still have to bring it into force in stages, and there will be, they have to write regulations, they have to draft guidance, which they have to go through. I mean, okay, their consultations sometimes are just, a sort of bit of a sham, but there will be opportunities to further try and influence it. At the end of the day, a lot depends on how local authorities implement it. And Somerset County Council, which will be the responsible authority here, has now controlled, it's got a new administration, Lib Dem administration. The Lib Dems national policy on home education is a bit crap, but somebody might be involved at a local level. And I might have managed to sneak in a little policy to the manifesto, which is around being really positive and supportive towards home education, respecting children's freedoms to learn in the way that best suits them. So you can hold them to that. So then Somerset implementing a very punitive and coercive sort of approach wouldn't be consistent with that. So we'll have to sort of switch to lobbying local authorities afterwards. And I will do my level best, because I'm now a member on Somerset County Council. I will absolutely do my utmost to minimise any bad impact that this bill would have. Also, there are some great home education advocacy groups who will always be there to provide advice and support to individual families. We can do what we can as a local group. I'm quite happy to go into bat for people if they're being mistreated. I will stand up for them. But there are some excellent, sometimes you need to call the cavalry, and the cavalry is Hafford Holmes, aka Wendy Charles Warner of Education Otherwise, and others who have a huge, vast experience of this. And when they go into bat for people, they are really, really effective. So we have that still. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's helped. Hopefully it has. It is a worrying time, but if we stick together, we will be okay. So stop sharing. Please put questions in the comments, and yeah, we all need to get signing these petitions that are coming our way.